are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Woo! I'm gonna go crazy, man. Why you pulling the blicky out?
In pop culture today, I'm talking about majority of the content we consume from movies, TV shows, books have almost always revolved their story around the protagonist who for the most part had a sense of moral purpose engraved in their inner being, usually pursuing acts for the better good, usually going up against an antagonist who is basically the polar opposite, smothered in trauma with large doses of hatred, and instead of maybe seeking out a therapist, they make the attempt to quite possibly obliterate the entire existence of humanity or whatever evil plan that they have for no other reason than they're just fucking mad that day. I don't know.
You know how much I sacrificed? Anyway.
Now, we eat this shit up like Matt Tony doing a food challenge. This formula that we've been using for centuries now, and that honestly has continued to work. And you know what they say, don't fix what's not broken and what makes money, because capitalism. I mean, at this point, these stories have become second nature to us, that we don't even realize that the tropes of good guy versus evil guy in media hasn't always been the norm. It's only been a blip in the time that these constructs of good versus evil has been a reoccurring theme in the media that we consume. If we look at folklore and fairy tales from oral tradition, they didn't really have these virtuous acts of righteousness. Examples of these would be like the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, where this poor boy was basically a kleptomaniac and pulled the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 finger discount on this giant for some gold after his wife was gracious enough to give him a bite to eat, just so him and his moms could eat, because survival of the fittest, Charles Darwin. What about Cinderella, where you could come under the assumption that her hoe-ass stepsisters were the antagonists, but the real takeaway from that story is that if you want to be a bad bitch, you can't only look the part, but you gotta have mannerisms and kindness as well. Same thing with the Three Little Pigs. There was no good versus evil, just who was going to get to eat dinner first, tying back into the laws of nature and the workings of the food chain. More stories did not suppress the idea of goodness. There was no big battle scene at the end of the movie where the protagonists reigned superior and won through their righteous virtues. So, when did the constructs of moral dichotomy begin? Well, first I have to state that although I'm saying the concept of good guy versus evil guy hasn't been very prominent in old folklore or fairy tales or stories from the past, that does not mean that there weren't stories where two opposing sides were going up against each other for a sense of moral ambiguity. Those stories are endless. I mean, come on now, war has been a repetitious act that we've been committing since we've developed consciousness. I mean, straight out the jump, our ancestors wanted to throw hands for some land. I mean, come on, it's in our genetic code. But there has never been an emphasization on the values that these characters were fighting for. Now let's get that straight. So let's get into it. The Grimm brothers, along with the philosopher Johann Gottfried von Herder, long ass name had ass boy, were knowingly aware of how language and folklore was an ideal way at defining values. An example of this would be Cinderella, about graciousness and being a bad bitch, and decided in order to unite the German people into a modern nation, they would write their own local folklores and fairy tales and unique versions of already well-known stories, with the concept that the citizens of a nation should be bound by a common set of values. While the Grimm brothers heard united, the German people heard racism, and things took a complete 180 real quick, and decided to use these stories as a fire to actually hate the Jewish people. Humans are flawed. I don't know what to say. Now these stories started to spread like the bubonic plague, and the influence from the Grimm brothers stories started to be emulated by other writers and folklorists, who then started to write their own folklore with a national agenda, where some of them were aimed to a much more political vision than an ethical one. The historical shift on the telling of stories then began to change and began to bring all new meaning to previous folk stories. An example of this would be Robin Hood in the original story. My man's was just robbing people because he could do it. There was no more reasoning behind it. If my man saw you coming, you were gonna run them pockets. But in the modern version, they make it a virtuous act where he then now gives back to the poor, even creating an antagonist that is the Sheriff of Nottingham, creating an even deeper meaning against the power versus the powerlessness.
Down with the monarchs, fuck the queen.
What makes it more interesting is that since there is this moral obligation and values imprinted in these characters in these modern stories, it starts to create this sense that there is only black and white and no middle ground for conversation. Either you're with the good team or the bad team, and that's it. Sometimes you'll have the antagonists have a change of heart and switch sides, a concept that would be completely foreign to anybody born a few centuries ago, because the mere emotional alteration would not cause anybody to switch sides. In real life, this isn't a metaphorical conflict between the ideology of love and hate. Nah, bro, this is war right now. An example of this would be like Darth Vader and him switching up, which really only showcased his internal conflict that always resided due to him never coping with his trauma. Once again, we should all seek a therapist. Another common trope is that of the protagonist and just how morally good he is and how he maintains these values and never switches up. But like, why? You know, like, come on, Batman, your life would be a lot easier if you just off the Joker. You are making your life a whole lot more difficult and miserable by keeping these villains alive. Like, bro, what is Einstein's definition of insanity? Repeating the same thing over again, expecting different results. In the grand scheme of things, ultimately, the Grimm brothers' original idea of bringing nations closer together backfired and has been utilized for the exact same thing that they were afraid of. A lot of these early superheroes were created to promote this political concept that there was this good that is that of America and the bad to whomever force we were going up against at the time.
Captain America and the Red Skull became so well known and so popular with the kids, it was as though we couldn't print enough magazines to satisfy the demand. The Red Skull, of course, was a Nazi, and Cap represented the fighting forces of freedom, and just guess who won at the end of every story.
In these stories, there is no morality, there is no end goal for righteousness, there is only the fact that the opposing side doesn't agree with me. They don't share the same values as I do. Therefore, they are different and a force that must be stopped. They gotta die. Everybody say thank you to the Grimm brothers.
Thank you, Grimm brothers.
Lethal Lolo signing off. If you like that video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe. What are your thoughts on the concept of good versus evil? If you want to vote for Danny DeVito 2024, check the links out below. Other than that, hope to see you on the next one. Peace.